I'll tell you, I'm especially glad to be here tonight. I'll tell you why I'm especially glad. I did a book signing here in New York a few weeks ago, and a librarian came up to the table and she said, "May I have my picture taken with you? The kids all think you're dead." So that's why I'm especially glad to be here tonight. Actually, I'm not having a good night at all. I came in early, and a woman stopped me at the door, and she said, "Did anyone ever tell you you look a lot like R.L. Stine? No offense." She said no offense. So it's not a good day. I don't know. And listen, this is a fan mail. This is a fan letter. This is a real fan letter today, right? Are you ready? Dear R.L. Stine, I love your books. You're like the scariest man on earth. I want to know everything about you. Do you have hair? Why, really? Why? Well, okay, no return. When I heard that the subject was no return, I had sort of a strange reaction because I moved here right after college to become a writer, and one of my very first jobs was writing stories for a soft drink magazine. And in those days, every bottle said, "No deposit, no return." And I know that's not interesting at all. Why would I even bring it up? I used to write articles about soft drinks, new kinds of cans, flip-top cans, new syrups. One day, a guy discovered that you could put writing inside a bottle cap. You could do contests, and you could have writing. And the guy said to me, "You know, there's a whole world of communication in a bottle cap." And that's when I knew I had to get another job. And actually, well, I'll tell you about the next job I got. This has nothing to do with no return, of course. The next job I got was writing stories for a men's magazine. And actually, it was I needed the work. I was not really proud of this. It was sort of a sex and sadism magazine. And it was, what happened is they would give me a photograph, and it was always a woman tied up and a guy threatening her with a knife. And I would have to write a story to go with the photograph. So I was kind of ashamed to be doing this, and so I never signed my name to the stories. I always signed my brother's name. And I signed the name of my high school principal. So that was that. But that's not really what I wanted to talk about. Actually, after that, I never wanted to be scary. What I was saying is once you enter the land of the scary, there's no return. And I never really wanted to be, I always wanted to be funny. I wrote about 100 joke books for kids before I turned scary. And I did a humor magazine for kids called Bananas for 10 years. You want to hear one of my jokes? Yes. This is one of my jokes. What do you get when you cross a dog with a frog? You get a dog that can lick himself from across the room. Come on. Do you believe I made a living doing that, writing that? Anyway, I think I entered the land of the scary at a very early age. I'm going to tell you a true story that happened to my brother Bill and me when we were kids back in Ohio. And we were, really? I got out. We were very poor. We lived in a tiny little house. And my cousin Stanley lived a couple blocks away. And Bill and I hated Stanley, partly because we had to wear his old clothes to school. And he was very mean about it. He'd say, "Oh, that shirt looked much better on me." And, "Oh, you look ridiculous in my old pants." And so he made us feel bad. And the other thing was that Stanley was always scaring us. He'd love to jump out of closets or hide under our bed and just torture us. And he ruined one of my birthday parties by climbing in the window and scaring everybody. And I think Bill and I had one dream in life. We had one ambition, and that was to scare Stanley. And then one day, I figured out how to do it. This part was sort of sad. A man lived about 3 doors down from us. His name was Mr. Wilson. He was very old, and he died. And people in the neighborhood were sad. He was a nice old man. One morning, I was walking by his house, and the front door was open. And I thought, oh, somebody forgot to close Mr. Wilson's door. So I went running up and climbed on the stoop, and I started to close the door, and then I thought, gee, I wonder what it looks like inside his house. I've never really been in a dead man's house. So I pushed the door open, and I stepped inside, and it was very cold in the house. The heat had been turned off, but everything else was left in place. And I remember this red morning sunlight filtering in through the front window. It was the only light. And I looked very quickly around the house, and then I left, and then I had an idea. I knew how Bill and I could scare Stanley. So that afternoon, I told Bill my plan. I said, listen, Stanley's coming for dinner tomorrow night. And you know he's scared of ghosts, right? Well, here's what I'm going to do. You, after dinner, sneak over to Mr. Wilson's house, go into his house, get into his bed, and cover yourself up completely in his covers. And then I will dare Stanley to come over there. I'll say, I bet you're too scared to go to a dead man's house. And when I bring him in, I'll bring him into the bedroom, and then you slowly sit up under the covers. Slowly sit up and say, get out of my house. And Bill thought this was a great idea. We both thought it was a great idea. But Bill said, you know, I have my trombone lesson after school. My brother he loved playing trombone, but he was very short. He had short arms. He couldn't play any low notes. He couldn't reach the low notes. But he played anyway. I said, don't worry, I'll keep Stanley late. We'll play a game or something, and then I'll give you plenty of time. I'll bring him over. So the next night, we were all excited. Stanley came for dinner, and after dinner, we played a game of Monopoly or something. And I said, Stanley, I'll bet you're too scared to go to a dead man's house. He said, no, I'm not. Are you kidding? Let's go. Come on, lead the way. So we went outside. It was a cold October night. I remember the ground was all crunchy hard from the frost, and there was just a little silvery pale sliver of a moon up in the sky. And we walked to Mr. Wilson's house, and I led him inside, and it was pitch black except for this little moonlight coming in. And I said, Stanley, I'll bet you're too scared to go into a dead man's bedroom. He said, lead the way. I'm not scared at all. And I led him into Mr. Wilson's bedroom, and I could see the lump in the covers. I could see Bill was there. And we stood there, and slowly, slowly, the covers rose up. Slowly, they rose up, and the voice said, get out of my house! And Stanley's eyes bulged, his mouth dropped open. He was terrified. It worked. He let out a little squeak. He couldn't even scream. And he turned, he ran out of the house. He ran right straight out of the house. I thought, it worked, this was great, scary. I could hear him screaming out on the street. And I went to the front door, and I watched him going down the street screaming. He was terrified. And then I saw my brother coming up the driveway. And he said, is it too late to scare Stanley? That's my true ghost story. Thank you very much. Thank you.